A couple of very important news reports that came out the last few days that are not getting the attention they deserve, even though these reports came from the New York Times and the Washington Post. Even though those publications didn't really get to the crux of the matter and didn't realize what they were revealing. Now, what am I talking about? Prior to the President of the United States, last Wednesday of last week, even appearing on the Mall to give a speech, there was preparation by several groups in several states to storm the Capitol building, to arm up and storm the Capitol building in a military-style operation. That's pretty shocking in and of itself. That's number one. Number two, the FBI field office in Norfolk, Virginia, as well as the NYPD, had intelligence of some sort that suggested there was going to be an attack on the Capitol building. That information was provided to the field office in Washington, D.C., where they have access to the entire FBI and the entire Department of Justice. They shared that information with the Terrorism Task Force. Now, what does that mean? That means they shared it with the Capitol Police. They shared it with the D.C. Metropolitan Police. They shared it with other FBI elements, Secret Service elements. In other words, the information is shared local, state operations around D.C., regional, as well as federal law enforcement. What did they do with that information? We don't know. Now, the Washington FBI unit put out somewhat like disinformation a couple days ago, saying there was no pre-planned information they were aware of. That's flatly false. It even gets worse. The Sergeant at Arms for the House and the Sergeant at Arms for the Senate both were urged by the Capitol Hill police chief, that watches the Capitol building, to bring in the National Guard because the group that was coming to see the president and support the president was going to be huge. So he tells the media, and now he's kind of clammed up because he was fired, he says that he got the brush off. He also contacted the Pentagon, where he pretty much got the brush off. The mayor's office wasn't all that excited about it either. What was the main argument he was receiving? Well, one of these sergeants at arms said the optics would be bad to bring in the military, to have National Guard there standing in military garb. I want you to listen to this. That is unequivocal, factual, substantive information that the President of the United States could not incite the violence because the violence was pre-planned. As a matter of fact, the prosecutor who is leading the charge, the acting U.S. attorney in Washington, D.C., said they're looking into conspiracy. A conspiracy isn't something that happens spontaneously when you hear a speech. A conspiracy is something that takes place beforehand. What else underscores the fact that the President of the United States didn't incite an insurrection against the Capitol building? Our friend John Solomon at Just the News looked at the timeline that was provided in the New York Times piece, and he went through the timeline. The attack on the Capitol building occurred 20 minutes before the president even finished his speech. His speech was about 60 minutes long. The attack was pre-planned days before from out-of-staters who came armed and had nothing to do with the president's speech. The attack occurred 20 minutes before his speech ended. Now, another publication called the National Pulse, they went through the timeline too. They looked at the New York Times piece. They also looked at the Washington Post piece. And by their calculation, the attack on the Capitol building had to occur before the president even began his speech. But here's the point. Whichever timeline you embrace, it wasn't incitement brought by the President of the United States. Additional point. When they were debating impeachment on the floor of the House of Representatives, which would have been what? Wednesday afternoon. And it went into almost Wednesday evening. They had access to exactly the same information I'm conveying to you. They had access to the New York Times piece. They had access to the Washington Post original piece and its follow-up pieces. They knew exactly what I'm telling you. And they went ahead with impeachment anyway. And Nancy Pelosi, who's in charge of security for the House of Representatives as the Speaker, she chooses the Sergeant at Arms for the House of Representatives. The Sergeant at Arms reports directly to the Speaker. Nobody's asked her. As of now, when I'm speaking to you, what did you know and when did you know it? Were you alerted to the fact that there was going to be violence? And if you were, what did you do about it? They didn't call in the National Guard. The National Guard didn't show up until after the violence was over, at about 5 p.m. at night. Furthermore, what this also underscores is the overwhelming 99.9% of the people who attended had nothing to do with this violence. In fact, they didn't. And in fact, they weren't part of any conspiracy, and they were not involved in pre-planning a military attack. Now we know why 3 pipe bombs showed up, one at the Republican National Committee, one at the Democrat National Committee, and one was another location. And they were ready to go, at least the one at the RNC. They brought out the bomb squad, and they had to deal with it. I remember watching the breaching of the Capitol building, and I turned to my wife, Julie, and I said to her, since when do Trump supporters wear gas masks? They came with gas masks, these people. Since when do they wear military-style helmets? Since when do they open their backpacks and have all kinds of weapons, including hammers, to break glass? And as I said on radio the other day, there have been hundreds of Trump rallies. In the last 3 or 4 months, there have been 50 to 60 Trump rallies. In all parts of the country, there's never been any violence. People showing up with gas masks and all the rest. There's never been any violence whatsoever. And yet on that day, there was. Because things aren't always as they seem to be, are they? The first story is never the correct story. That's why they rushed to impeach the President of the United States. These are very inconvenient facts that completely undermine the entire narrative that's been pushed by the media from day one, from moment one. And it's been pushed by the Democrats. And now the President of the United States, as far as I'm concerned, deserves an apology. Facebook and Twitter in particular should immediately revive his accounts. They won't, but they should. And the media, which has been trying to hold Trump accountable for what took place, is corrupt as hell. Because even now with this information, they're still saying, well, he didn't call off his supporters. He could have called them off. This wouldn't have. These were militia-type people, military, paramilitary-type people. They were organized. There wasn't anything Trump could do. But I do want to know what Nancy Pelosi knew, and I do want to know what Mitch McConnell knew and anybody else there. There should be a commission. There should be a commission. We set up commissions, to look at why we have sliced bread and why we put peanut butter and jelly together. Let's have a real commission, like we did with 9/11 and other commissions, and seriously look into what took place here. We spent years investigating something that never existed, a complete fiction that became an abstraction, Russia collusion, that was all intentional. But we need to know what took place here. And what's interesting is the day it took place, I went on radio that evening and I said, I want to know the identity of every one of these perpetrators, who they were and where they came from. And immediately the media attacked me and said, you're trying to divert, that it's not Trump supporters. The media are sick. They're a cancer on the body politic. We need to know, forget their broad brush, exactly who these people are and exactly what their motivation was and exactly if they did pre-plan. Because it all demonstrates that this was not spontaneous, that people who came from all over the country to watch the president, to support him, to, yes, peacefully protest and take their objections to the House and to the Senate, they weren't armed, they weren't violent, they weren't paramilitary, they didn't intend to do any of these things, and the overwhelming majority didn't, and yet they're now being called white supremacists. This is now their fallback position, white supremacists. I will note, as I said the other day, that we don't hear anymore from the leading Democrats and the media that the state, local, federal law enforcement, all of whom are helping now Washington in preparation for the Biden inauguration. We don't hear that they're racist now, do we? We don't hear now that there's systemic racism in the police departments, federal, state, and local. We're not hearing any of that. We're not hearing defund the police or slash their budgets. We're not hearing that there shouldn't be a military presence and don't use the Insurrection Act. Remember General Mattis and General Kelly attacking the President of the United States because he dared to even think about bringing in the National Guard to protect Lafayette Park, even when the White House was under attack and over 50 Secret Service personnel were injured, and the President of the United States was rushed to the bunker, the nuclear bunker, underground, below the White House. They said, don't bring in the military because Trump will be a dictator if he militarizes this. Now we have 15 to 20,000 National Guard in Washington, D.C., many of them armed. I don't have a problem with that. But I didn't have a problem with it when the White House was under attack. That's part of our government too, you know. And I didn't have a problem with it when a federal courthouse in Portland was under attack for 100 nights in a row with Molotov cocktails, people breaching the walls. Those are federal judges. Those are juries. Those are grand juries. There's all kinds of justice that's supposed to be taking place in that building. So when the Article 3 part of our government was under attack, the judiciary, the President of the United States sent in federal law enforcement. Nancy Pelosi called them stormtroopers. James Clyburn, the number 3 Democrat, called them stormtroopers. They said they were provoking the violence. When our monuments were being torn down, Nancy Pelosi said, you know, these things happen. She's not particularly a fan of monuments. Kamala Harris was contributing to a fund to give these people bail so they could get out of jail as fast as possible. Joe Biden sat on his mouth, said absolutely nothing except toward the end of the summer when the polls were starting to turn against him. So they didn't mind violence against the Article 3 part of our government, the judiciary, nor did they mind violence against the Article 2 part of our government, the presidency. You'll recall the White House came under attack. They had to bring in more Secret Service personnel. What happened? 50 of them were injured. They had to build higher fences and so forth for the next night. The President of the United States was quickly brought into the bunker, the nuclear bunker under the White House, deep under the White House, because they were afraid that that facility would be breached. What was the reaction of the Democrats and the media when the President of the United States had Lafayette Park cleared out, or the Attorney General did the next day? Oh, that was fascistic. They were burning a church. They were attacking buildings. They were attacking the White House. There were no concerns by the same people in the media and the Democrat Party. None. And they said, General Mattis and General Kelly, you might recall, you better not use the Insurrection Act. You better not bring in the National Guard or any armed forces, as a matter of fact. They were accusing the president of being Hitlerian. Remember all that? You hear none of that today. The military is there. Much of it is armed at the direction of the Secretary of Defense and the President of the United States. 15 to 20,000 guardsmen, as I said earlier. FBI is there. You have SWAT teams there. They are armed to the teeth. There are thousands and thousands of military and law enforcement personnel in Washington, D.C. Just an amazing thing, isn't it? They were never racists. There was never a systemic racism. They never should have been defunded. And yet when it comes to other parts of our country and cities, other than Washington, D.C., and other than the Capitol, they basically say to the citizenry, you fend for yourself.
Want to see more? Sign up for Levin TV.